And so we work very closely with the presidents and with the admissions office and with the advising office, which I think is a key component to anyone transferring from one institution to another. At Western, we have 42% of our students are transfer students, and we make sure that the curriculum alignment is in place, and that also the advising that they're getting at the community college is in affiliation with that at Western Carolina University. So a seamless transfer is really, really important. Curriculum alignment is really, really important.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody for being here and the chairman for calling this meeting. My time's expired, so I'll yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. Good morning to all the panelists. Welcome, Journey. I hope that you will remember forever this moment in your life and how your mother is sharing her story with us, because that story has you as a part in it, a major part. I'd also like to take an opportunity, the privilege to recognize in the audience a student from the Northern Marianas who is attending school here in Washington, D.C., Olivia. So your name's in the record for good. She doesn't like that, but anyway. I come from a place where we have a community college, a two-year college. 90% of our students qualify for a Pell Grant. And when I went to college, I had to come here as a foreign student. My father had a family of 7 children to raise. He was making $1.25 an hour, and he lost his job. I couldn't just go and get a job because I needed to get immigration to approve it as well. So it wasn't easy for me to finish college, to be very honest. Ms. Parker, congratulations. I mean, you're in my prayers too. You will succeed also, I agree with. But Chancellor Morrison-Shedler, you may not know this, but again, my district in the Northern Marianas and American Samoa are the only 2 U.S. jurisdictions without a 4-year public university. Each holds a single community college. Our students face the cost of non-resident tuition at 4-year institutions, as well as the extra travel cost to attend school in Hawaii, 4,000 miles away from home, or almost 8,000 miles away from your school. As a member of this committee, I've worked and I continue to work on legislation to help reduce the cost for my constituents. I must compliment your state for committing the resources to be able to make college affordable and also make sure the students are nurtured too. I will submit my questions for the record, but as a university chancellor, do you believe the federal government has a role to play in assisting students with unique college costs, such as those from the Marianas and American Samoa?
The federal government has a number of things in place, and as I mentioned earlier, I think the way to help people is to make sure that those grants and loans that are available are able to be easily attained. In North Carolina, we subsidize the in-state students of the $500 per semester. We also have a $2,500 for out-of-state. But we also have an 18% cap on the number of out-of-state students that we can take into North Carolina. Yes. And I think that's something that one has to be aware of when we're funding the students in North Carolina. I will say that we are very fortunate at Western Carolina University, and within the system, actually, 50% of the students who come from out of state to North Carolina end up staying in the state of North Carolina. And so that is a great investment in North Carolina and allows people to give back to the economy within North Carolina.
Right, thank you. And for me, we prefer that you educate our students and then they come back home and use what they learn. But Ms. Parker, college students in the Marianas and across the country are juggling work, parenting, and school. In fact, 1 in 4 students nationwide are parents. More than 1 in 3 are older than 25, and almost 2 out of 3 work while in college. So what supports made it easier for you to remain in college, persist?
Thank you. Thank you for your wishes earlier. I've been connected to resources, and that's what's been able to get me to completion. For example, the biggest help, I would say, was being connected to the Jobs and Family Services representative on campus. I went to visit the representative for child care costs. I needed help getting child care costs to be approved while I was in school, and Journey was at daycare at the time. When I went to speak to the Job and Family Services representative, she also let me know that I could enroll for additional benefits, so the health care, the food stamps, and then I was also referred to in that same department, not through her specifically, but to Scholar House for the student parent housing. It takes a platform of all of those put together for me to be able to get to completion.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my time is up. Will submit questions for the record. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again for this hearing. It's important to find out what is actually got us to this point and then try to fix it. It's a difficult situation. We've got 7.4 million jobs open in this country right now. We got college graduates that can't get a job. I cannot, for the life of me, understand that. And everywhere I go, people need people. And it's not necessarily a college graduate, it's skilled people. And of course, the chairman put up a chart up there about the difference in the wages of college graduates versus those who maybe have technical training and all that. That gap, in my opinion, is narrowing very quickly. I know that when I was in college, I had the opportunity to learn how to weld. And through that skill, I was going to co-op, and through that skill and working basically double time and help from my parents, I was able to get through it. Of course, I thought it was terribly expensive back then, and I'm sure I missed out on some of the college experience, but I had no college debt thanks to my great family and their support. So I can't imagine, Ms. Parker, what you've been through. And also to straighten out one other thing that came up here today, and I just have to do this, is that I did notice that you were on the Food Safety Nutrition Program. One of my colleagues brought up the Farm Bill. 80% of the Farm Bill is funding the safety net nutrition programs. It's not greedy farmers. We're just trying to keep our farmers in business so we can produce the best, safest, most efficient food supply. It's a national security issue, actually. So since you're here and you're learning from us and we're learning from you, I thought you probably needed to know that. So with that, Dr. Akers, your testimony mentions ways to bring private capital back into the student loan space, increase a competitive market participation in student lending, and can you expand on those issues and discuss any challenges policymakers should think about while considering private sector participation in student lending?
Sure. Is the question about private sector participation in provision of education or in the financing?
Well, in the financing. For example, we were told that the student loan rate is somewhere between 7 and 8%, and I know that, I come from the business world and we borrow money for much less than that. Now, obviously, you might have to get, like a small business government-backed loan, but at least you could reduce the interest rate substantially and provide where Ms. Parker could go and say, well, the government's charging me this and you're going to charge me. Give her choices. And also the financial institutions, I think, would do a much better job. At least I have to do a portfolio and tell them how I'm going to have to pay the money back. Maybe they could educate Ms. Parker on how to really pay that money back.
Sure. So there's a bit of a misconception about the idea that private sector capital was previously involved in the federal student lending program. So depending on how long you've been involved in this issue, we previously were providing federal student loans through the FEL program, in which the loans were originated and financed by the private sector, but those loans were originated using terms that were prescribed by legislation. So in essence, Department of Education was outsourcing to the private market the creation of those loans. Those loans were not private sector or private loans in any broader sense because they were not underwritten. So what you're talking about is the process by which a private lender looks at a particular borrower and assesses their ability to repay in the future. That does not happen in the federal lending program for student borrowers and did not happen even when private capital were involved. The way forward to think about private capital in higher education finance, I believe, is in the realm of income share agreements. So income share agreements are a relatively newly employed mechanism that are an alternative to loans that can help borrowers finance their education. So rather than taking out a loan and having fixed payments to repay over 10 years or whatever the term of the loan is, a borrower takes cash up front in exchange for a promise to pay a fraction of their income over a set period of time. And so this provides an insurance policy for students that if they face low income or no income for whatever reason, they're not on the hook for an unaffordable financial obligation. And it also puts some skin in the game for institutions. So in thinking about private capital going forward, I think that's the place to focus attention.
Well, again, I had an amendment on the past bill markup to somehow put financial, actually education into the student loan program. So, you know, like folks like Mrs. Parker would understand, you know, what she's up against. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Fox, for holding this hearing. Thank you to all of our witnesses, Ms. Parker and Journey. Especially thank you to you for being here and telling your story and reminding us that the costs of higher education are not just about tuition, housing, childcare. There's so many other costs as well. I also worked my way through. I started 2 years of community college, then 2 years of college, 3 years of law school with a combination of grants, loans, and work study, and ended up, because it was a long time ago, with a manageable amount of debt. And my first job was with the federal government, not with the law firm where I could have made more money. And unfortunately, that's not the story I hear frequently today. So I'm really glad that we're having this hearing, especially when we're talking about students who remain underrepresented. But I'm also glad that there seems to be a general recognition about the importance of higher education among people here today. We certainly need a short-term solution for people like Ms. Parker with existing debt, but we also need long-term solutions to make sure that anyone who wants to go to college can do so without being burdened with debt. Mr. Quall, nice to see you. The Federal Work Study Program allows students to get work study experience and financial aid. And I have introduced the Opportunities for Success Act to reform the Federal Work Study Program, to modernize the funding formula, which has not been done for quite some time, and also to make sure that work is going to, the work study jobs are helping to align students' work with their career goals and interests. We want the aid to go to the students most in need. So what are your suggestions about how to make sure that institutions are serving the largest number of low-income students and helping to align their interests with their work-study jobs?
Ms. Bonamici, thank you for the question. I share your support for the work-study program. Work is an important strategy for getting students through college, both because it fills important gaps in financial aid budgets, but also research shows that modest amounts of work can actually help retain students and give them an opportunity to explore career interests and improve their earnings potential after college. The challenge we have, though, is many students are in the same low-wage workforce as other low-income Americans, and we know those jobs are very unstable, can be difficult to get scheduled. So to have an opportunity for a work-study program where jobs are designed around schedules of students, they're often on campus, they're connected to career and academic interests, is very valuable. The existing work-study program funds colleges largely historically, and it no longer sends the money where there are large numbers of low-income students. So, for example, New York University gets a larger allocation than CUNY does. In fact, if you're a low-income student at a four-year private university, you're more likely to get work study than a low-income student at a public university, even though we know public universities disproportionately enroll low-income students. So I think...
And I want to get another couple questions in, but I think the message that it's time to update the funding formula. Thank you also for mentioning my Simple Act that I've been working on. I plan to reintroduce this bill, which will protect many borrowers from default by getting more students and keeping more students in income-driven repayment. You mentioned the importance of automating the annual income recertification process and also automatically enrolling severely delinquent borrowers. These are both changes in the Simple Act. Can you talk a little bit about how this will help students?
Yes, the income-driven repayment is a really important safety net. It allows us to tell students we think loans are an excellent investment, but if it doesn't pay off, we can guarantee that loan payments will be affordable. There are very important changes that need to be made to the program to simplify the program for students, make it easier to enroll, auto-enroll delinquent students. And so I think the Simple Act has a lot of potential to reduce loan delinquency and default and make a real difference.
Thank you so much. And I also heard retention several times this morning. And that's a significant issue, especially if we look at the students with debt. If they don't graduate, they're much less likely to be able to pay that back. So who wants to talk about the importance of Gear Up and TRIO and programs that help with retention? Dr. Morrison-Shaler.
All of those programs help with retention, and it's key that if you have students who have debt, that you get them through the process and you get them to a point where they can start to work and earn money and pay back those debts. And those programs that you're talking about are essential. They include things like financial literacy. They include things like working, if you're going to work in something that will get you the experience that will help you to succeed in your career. So there are career pathway experiences. And so all of those things help with retention. And just making sure that students can focus on their studies and get their work done without having to work on 2 or 3 jobs really, really is important. So any program that will help students be able to focus and get through their degrees and be successful, I'm fully supportive of.
Thank you, and over time, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mrs. Smucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Dr. Schattler. I'd like to learn just a little bit more about your transfer program, which helps students prepare for several high-demand career fields that you described. How did you determine what jobs are in high demand in the workforce?
So within Western North Carolina, we do surveys. We look to see what jobs are available, in particular, what jobs are needed. And so in our particular area, healthcare is a big industry and one in which we are severely need for the citizens of Western North Carolina. And so we make sure as an institution that we are providing the right programs with the right qualifications and the right experiences so that students will then graduate and then go into those careers and be successful. And that lifts up the whole economic development of our region.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about the agreements that you have in place with some of the partner colleges? Was it difficult to reach those agreements, or talk a little bit about how that came about?
Well, we all have the same goal in mind for our students to be successful, and to do that we need to make sure that we have curriculum alignment. If you're taking 2 years of community college and earning your AA degree, then those credits transfer into your 4-year degree, and then you can go through as seamlessly as possible. Advising is really key on that, so we do joint advising between the community colleges and the university, making sure that the advisors know what to say to the students if they even are thinking about going to a 4-year degree. Because a lot of students go to community colleges not thinking that they're even going to have that dream. And so advising is a real component. And then making sure that those memorandums of understanding between the colleges and the universities are clear and updated regularly as curriculum changes to meet the needs of a growing industry like healthcare.
Yeah. In your mind, what could other regions learn from you? What obstacles would they have to setting up similar arrangements?
It's all about communication. It's all about the best for the student and making sure that that pathway is one that is affordable And this is where NC Promise, I think, has been fabulous, because the cost of NC Promise to the student can be similar to a community college cost. And therefore, if a student has managed to get through the 2 years and with the cost of that, to be able to transfer to Western Carolina University, for example, as an NC Promise school, means that they're already on that pathway. They know that they can afford it. They know how much debt they're going to incur, and they know that they're going to get a high-quality education provided by high-quality faculty and staff who make sure that they have the experiences that they need to be successful.
Thank you. Dr. Akers, innovation in any industry is critical to increasing competition amongst providers and delivering a high-quality product to consumers at a low price. And it appears that colleges and universities, we know education is changing, but in some ways continue to use the same model that's been in existence for a long, long time, for decades and maybe longer. How can we be helpful, or maybe to what extent do you think the federal government sort of constrains what colleges and universities can do? How can we work with you to encourage more innovation in higher education?
Sure. So in order for a new institution to come into existence, they need to be able to find and retain students. It's challenging for them to do that in the current space because they're competing with institutions who have eligibility for very generous aid through the Pell Grant program and access to subsidized student loans. The way to potentially allow them access to federal student aid is through the Experimental Sites Initiative and the EQUIP program. So this is an effort that was started under the Obama administration to allow innovative institutions that don't fit the standard model of what higher education looks like in this country, and therefore don't achieve the standards that are necessary to gain access to financial aid. It allowed them to partner with traditional institutions and to sort of play with federal student aid and experiment. That effort was not largely successful, perhaps because of the way it was designed. I'd encourage that the federal government continue to support those types of initiatives that don't just open the floodgates and allow federal student aid to be utilized by these new and exciting business models without any accountability, but rather to continue to test out and using different sites and trial programs for these new programs that have a proven track record of success.
Great. My time, I look forward to working with you on that, but my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman from California, Mr. Takano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate that you're holding hearings on this important topic. I want to thank all of the panelists for being here today, but I want to begin my question with Mr. Quall. It's good to see you again, and thank you for being here to share your recommendations on improving college affordability. I have a letter from Chancellor Oakley of the California Community Colleges that describes how the California Community Colleges have been hit hard, particularly by the for-profit closures in the state of California. And so what happens is when for-profit companies suddenly shutter, the community colleges, which are already under-resourced, how they mobilize to provide support to effective students. So without objection, I'd like to enter this into the record. The ability of the community colleges to properly serve these students is severely hampered by the poor quality education, that the students receive at the for-profit institution, and by the debt load students carry after attending one of these schools. I've heard too many stories about students attempting to transfer their credits, only to find out that almost none of their credits actually transferred, and that they're nearing the maximum, their maximum loan limit, impeding them to continue their education, in this case at community colleges. So, Mr. Quall, what can the federal government do to provide better upfront accountability of for-profit institutions to better protect students?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Takano. We have seen over the last few years for-profit colleges enrolling over 100,000 students close and leave them in the bind. So the instances you mentioned in California are only the latest in a long chain that began with Corinthian. It is important to have strong accountability protection, such as the gainful employment rule, which requires that typical graduates of for-profit programs be able to repay their loans. The borrower defense rule, which holds colleges accountable for illegal conduct such as fraud. The incentive compensation rule, which prohibits deceptive and high-pressure recruiting. And the 90-10 rule, which requires at least 10% of students being willing to pay for the education out of their own pocket. So there are important accountability rules. Many of them are being neglected by the current administration, and others need to be strengthened by Congress.
Yeah, I'm aware of the neglect and actually the rollback of protections. And I understand in the chairman's AIM Hire Act that we actually work to strengthen some of the protections you mentioned. How do we ensure that students aren't left with burdensome debt after a for-profit closure?
Well, one important step is to make sure that students have their loans discharged after a school closes. Current law gives them the right to choose whether to transfer or get their loans discharged. Many students never actually do either, so it's important to guarantee them that automatic right to have the school discharged. We need to adequately fund tuition relief funds so that students have that means. And we also shouldn't keep students in the dark. So, you know, when the Argosy College and these other colleges closed last week, it wasn't a surprise to the executives at those colleges. It wasn't a surprise to the Department of Education, but it was a surprise to a lot of the students who were borrowing and dipping into their savings to go to those schools.
That's amazing. I want to talk about income share agreements, or ISAs, that are contracts between college students and investors in which an investor agrees to pay a portion of a student's tuition for a portion of the student's future income after graduation. Speaking frankly, I see ISAs as another way to push the private market onto students, which has never resulted in positive outcomes. In an effort to shore up profits, the private market has been inclined to irresponsible and unfair practices when lending to vulnerable students, which is what led us to include consumer protections in the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010. Given the history of the private market in college financing, I'm concerned with the potential abuse of students through ISAs. Mr. Qual, what are some of the other pitfalls of ISAs?
Well, I share your concerns, Mr. Takano. I think that private loans, including ISAs, will always have higher costs and weaker consumer safeguards than federal student loans do. ISAs in particular are not transparent. And because students have very different earning trajectories, sometimes because of labor market discrimination, ISAs have the potential to have higher costs for some types of students and even exclude some students from some types of programs or colleges.
Well, my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you. Gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Watkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. So I represent Eastern Kansas. It's agrarian, and there's lots of poverty issues there. And I know personally what it's like to try and deal with mounting school debt. So it seems to me the solution was a pro-economic growth policy characterized by low taxes and low regulation that allows the economy to thrive. And does it work? Well, our pro-growth economic policy has led to record low unemployment. We're enjoying over 7 million job openings. The Labor Department, when reporting on hiring competition, says that there's an increase in average hourly pay by 3.4% from last year, which is the highest in a decade. Given the strong economy, Dr. Akers, are you seeing states beginning to thoughtfully reinvest into their higher education institutions, given the strong economic performance nationally?
Yeah, it does seem that there was a decline in state support of higher education following the Great Recession, and we have seen recent indications of an increase in investment.
Thank you, Doctor. Chancellor Morrison-Shetler, staying with the excessive red tape subject, would you speak to...
This hearing is set to continue another half hour or so, streaming online at cspan.org. We'll leave here as the U.S. House is gaveling in next. They're going to take up later a non-binding resolution that Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report should be made available to the public and Congress when it's released. Also on the agenda today, a bill on financial transparency, now live to the House floor on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. God of the universe, we give you thanks for giving us another day. We ask your blessing upon this assembly and upon all who call upon your name. Send your Spirit to fill their hearts with those divine gifts you have prepared for them. May your grace find expression in their compassion for the weak and the poor among us, and may your mercy encourage goodwill in all they do and accomplish this day. As the members of the People's House face the demands of our time, grant them and us all your peace. May all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
Amen. The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
The chair will now entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. I ask your consent to address the House Supervisors and my wife.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, President Trump's budget landed with a thud on the backs of working Americans this week. Its message is quite simple, that this administration will reward wealth with one hand and target working families with another. To this president, avoiding the estate tax for wealthy heirs is an entitlement, but the health care of everyday Americans is expendable. To this president, carried interest on passive income is a worthy tax benefit for executives, while a livable minimum wage for a working parent is a burden we cannot afford. To this president, a lengthy record of felony convictions won't deny your tax credit for a private jet, but a conviction for misdemeanor drug possession could cost you the roof over your head. A budget that puts Americans first doesn't deem millions of Americans unworthy. A budget that puts Americans first doesn't starve them of housing, of health care, and of food because their president counts the stock market as more important than our common humanity. But putting Americans first has never been the fundamental policy of this administration. It has always been to draw a bright line between the wealthy and the striving. Stand, reject this budget. Yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition? From Florida.
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks as necessary.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor Mayor Betty Walker of Chiefland, Florida, who passed away on Monday, February 25th. Mayor Walker served the citizens of Chiefland as an elected city commissioner for over 15 years and as mayor and vice mayor for 11 of those years. Betty Walker was the first African-American female elected official for the city of Chiefland. She was a great leader. She loved her community immensely. She advocated for the police and fire department and the maintenance departments as well. Mayor Walker had recently retired after spending almost 40 years helping adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. She truly loved the people of Chiefland. She was passionate about parks and recreation and always had a vision for her city. Mayor Walker leaves behind a rich legacy that not many can match. Mr. Speaker, please join me in honoring a life well lived and a community leader who will be missed by many. Mayor Betty Walker, Chiefland. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in Yemen, there are millions of Yemeni people who are on the brink of death from famine, disease, lack of access to food and water, basic medicine and health care. Thousands of Yemeni civilians have died in this genocidal war being waged by Saudi Arabia with support from the United States. They've been living under the looming threat of death at a moment's notice. This must end. Not another day can go by with U.S. support for this genocidal war. Saudi Arabia is not our ally. They spend billions of dollars spreading the Wahhabi Salafist ideology that fuels terrorist organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They take the weapons that they get from the United States and provide them to Al-Qaeda. Enough is enough. Today, the Senate is taking an important vote, and I urge my colleagues in the Senate to hear the pleas of the Yemeni people who are begging for their lives. Vote today to end the unconstitutional U.S. support for Saudi Arabia's genocidal war in Yemen. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition? Arkansas.
The Speaker loves North Carolina. I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and advise extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker. I rise in honor for the life and legacy of a friend and a Holocaust survivor, Fred Hillenrath, who recently passed away at the age of 90. Fred was only 4 years old when Adolf Hitler took over as Chancellor of Germany. After spending years in concentration camps throughout Romania, facing death, witnessing some of the most heinous and grotesque atrocities the world has seen, Fred and his family were finally rescued by a Jewish Russian soldier. With his newfound freedom, Fred moved to the United States to finish his education in electrical engineering. After meeting his wife, Eleanor, Fred moved first to San Francisco and finally to retire in Fairfield Bay, Arkansas. Here, he wanted that slower pace of life. In his later years, Fred advocated to young people, find your passion early and pursue it, even if adversity comes your way. He was a role model and friend to many across the state of Arkansas, and I extend my condolences, respect, and affection to his friends, family, and loved ones. Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Arkansas yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Arizona seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I am here to represent the residents of Arizona's 2nd Congressional District. I work for them. Our constituents sent us here to practice good government and to fight for their values and interests. So I'm upset